What's up everyone? Recently I've been working on my upcoming map, Nova Royale Remixed, and whilst I was working on it, I noticed many tips that would be good to show you guys to improve your nature, or maybe even help beginners out who want to learn the basics to placing nature. Really quickly before we start, shout out to anyone who has checked out the Patreon, and thanks to you too for subscribing, and also my creator code is NovaJay if anybody would like to show some extra support. Now let's get straight into the nature tutorial. As you can see, I have built some simple basic terrain which I'll be using to place nature on. I will be covering plants, then rocks, and then trees, so without further ado, let's begin. First up, I want to quickly talk about grass. Grass can be very memory consuming if you're trying to save memory, but here's what I like to do. There's this grass piece from the Shark Cliff Gallery, and then these new tall grass pieces from Chapter 3 that recently dropped. If you want to use the Shark Cliff grass, I like to slightly lower the height, and then place it in small groups, changing the size each time I place it. Now we have a nice clump of grass that can be placed around our terrain. Because we're only placing it in groups instead of overall, the terrain means we will save a lot of memory, whilst also having some nice grass. If you place it enough, you will definitely notice it when you're walking around and playing. Next up is the tall grass. Something cool you can do with this is place it once, then shrink down the size and place it around the larger one. And then you can place our small grass clump in front of it, to make a really nice grass transition. This looks good against terrain like I'm showing you here, but feel free to do whatever you want with it. These grass tips will make your nature feel less empty, whilst also saving memory rather than placing grass everywhere. Grass is now out of the way, so let's talk about rocks. I like to use 3 or 4 rocks as it saves memory, and if done right, it'll feel like you've used way more. The first thing I recommend doing is to place any rock near a terrain edge, and then shrink down this rock and place it near the rock. This adds way more detail to terrain edges, which is also a detail that just looks really nice and isn't used enough. Another thing is to create your own rock formations. Mixing different rocks together, and using the small rock tip I just gave you will result in these really cool looking formations that can further add more detail to terrain edges, and feels a lot more realistic and detailed compared to simply placing rocks on their own. Mess around with sizes of rocks, and experiment with different rock combinations, but make sure you space these rocks apart from each other. We need room for our plants and trees to go, and we don't want a cramped rocky area unless that's what you're going for. Just experiment with different rocks, and find a style that you like and are comfortable with. Let's take a quick look into plants. The Sanctuary Nature Gallery is full of Chapter 3 plant life, and so I recommend using this if you want extra plants or nature around your map. I'm going to choose a couple plants and I'll show you what I would do with them. First up is this plant. I would place it in areas which lack any nature, grass or rocks. But you can also add it areas which already have stuff like rocks or fences. It's a great way of adding extra detail to existing nature, and is also great to fill empty space. I did this all over my terrain. Next up is this plant. Similarly to what we did with the rocks, mess around with the size of this plant, and I really like placing it into terrain edges. This will really decorate your terrain edges and stop them from looking bland and boring, especially if you've also placed rocks into them too. So yeah, if you want to spend the memory on plants, it's definitely a great way to help bring your nature to life. Now let's finally move on to trees. I'm going to cover pine trees, birch trees, and then the normal oak trees. So first up are the pine trees. Now this tree does exist, however I'm not going to cover it, but you can simply do what I'm going to show you with the other pine tree type. Now pine trees look really good in small groups. You want to place one at normal size. You can slightly make it larger or smaller. And then you want to place a much smaller tree next to it. And then you can add these smaller versions of the tree around the group. You'll notice this is something Fortnite likes to do on their maps, and genuinely looks pretty good mixed with oak trees for example. Now if you really want to save memory, you can just shrink down this tree and use that for the smaller trees. However, it will give you more mats than the smaller ones would, so that is up to you. Now try making smaller groups of pine trees, and try making larger groups. Change up the sizes each time and really try to get these groups down. These trees can also be placed on their own, or even in twos, but you can pretty much do anything when it comes to pine trees. Now if you're looking for more detail, head over to the cube gallery. This is full of logs and tree stumps, which will help our pine tree area feel way more realistic. Take your log, and make it skinny like the pine tree logs are, and place them on the ground. These can be chopped down or broken pine trees. You can also use these tree stumps as pine tree stumps. Both the logs and stumps will help you to make pine tree biomes and forest feel more different from the rest of your map. Up next are birch trees. These are a lot more simple. These are usually found alone, or in groups of 2 or 3, and are usually less common compared to pine trees and oak trees. Place one around the normal size. Again, feel free to do whatever you want, but I like to then group it up with a much smaller tree and change the rotation. Seeing birch trees in groups like this can feel very natural and just looks appealing. Now you can go crazy with the group sizes, or even have an entire area full of them, but generally speaking, I like to keep them in these small groups, or alone. Now head over to the Spooky Mansion prefab or gallery and grab these orange leaf piles. If you want to spend memory on this, you can place them underneath the birch trees as if the leaves on the trees have fallen. This is another cooler detail to add more life and realism to your nature, but if you don't want to spend the memory on this, you don't have to. And now finally our oak trees. Just like you've previously learned with the other tree types, the small oak tree looks good either alone or grouped with other trees. Also try and keep all your nature spaced out, such as how I'm placing these trees in between rocks instead of piling everything together and cramping it. Now I like to place a small oak tree, and then place either one or two more with it, but have these slightly smaller or larger. I recommend hopping into solos or battle labs and just explore the map and take notes on how Fortnite does their nature. Now if you have a large group of small trees and it just feels empty, add either a small rock between them or even a plant. This all helps to keep our nature from feeling boring or empty. Now I like to keep the large trees less common. Place one down, and either don't change the size, or size it up like this. Now take what you've learned with the smaller trees, but apply this with a larger tree too. These groups along with the rest of the nature tips I've given in this video really do feel nice to explore without being crazy or cramped, and works really well specifically in BR maps, which shouldn't be too open, or too cramped. Now one final thing are the large bushes. These can either be placed in the open, and in more empty areas, or you can place these around and near trees. All the trees I've shown along with the large bush are from the variant foliage galleries. And that wraps up this video. I hope you learned some basic nature tips from this video, and if you did, I recommend you practice what you've learned over and over until you really develop it into your own thing. This type of nature provides a nice view, with plenty to farm mats from, and isn't empty or cramped. Thank you all for watching, and let me know if this did help. If you made it to this point in the video, comment any future tutorials or guides you want to see me make, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.